Hello, hello. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another installment of Open Air presented by the Harvey B. Gantt Center in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm Dexter Wimberly, and I'm incredibly thrilled about today's guest. Devin B. Johnson was born in Los Angeles in 1992. He obtained his BA in Fine Arts from the California State University of Channel Islands in 2015 and received the Master's of Fine Art at Pratt Institute in 2019. In addition to recently being an artist in resident for Fountainhead in Miami, he was selected as Artsy Vanguard in 2022 and named to Forbes 30 Under 30 Art and Design list in the same year. He was also included in Culture's Young Artists in 2021. Johnson was also one of 17 artists from around the world selected for the inaugural year of the Rock Senegal residency in 2020. His work is in the collections of the Hammer Museum in Los Angeles, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, the Museum of Contemporary Art Los Angeles, Pond Society in Shanghai, the Rubel Museum in Miami, the Columbus Museum of Art, the Longlati Foundation in Shanghai, among many others. Some of his recent exhibitions include Ritual of Welcome, a solo show at Nicodeme in Los Angeles, Becoming the Sea, which was on view at the Harvey B. Gantt Center, and Social Abstraction, curated by Antoine Sargent at Gagosian in Los Angeles and in Hong Kong. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Devin B. Johnson to today's conversation.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, man, how are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for giving out that wonderful introduction, Dexter. It's a pleasure to share some insights about the practice with you.
Yeah, my pleasure. And, I had to leave a lot out because in the, one could say, short career that you've had so far, you've done a lot and, a lot of accolades, a lot of accomplishments. I'm very happy in many ways to have seen you grow because the first time I encountered your work was a series of studio visits or workshops I was doing at Pratt. It must have been your last, few months there, the first time I saw your work. So now, almost a decade later, more or less, here you are. Some could say, a rising star artist in the world. How are you feeling right now about your career and your practice?
I mean, I'm not gonna lie, when you started reading all those things out, right? Like, I was like, wow, that's pretty impressive. I'm actually kind of like taking that all in by you putting all that out and saying that it's wow, there's a lot of accomplishments, a lot of God-given accomplishments through hard work and ambition that I'm astonished. But you know, obviously the work is not it's not done yet, and it's good that we have a good start. Let's keep the fire going.
Yeah, yeah. In many ways, it is the beginning. We've had some interesting encounters, as I mentioned. You know, encountering your work for the first time about a decade ago, and then you and I started to get into some regular conversations in 2020 when you were at BlackRock. You were one of a handful of people right in the height of the pandemic that I was in pretty regular communication with. So that's going back, almost 5 years exactly. So we have these
Yeah,
interesting touchstones and sort of like milestones to reflect on. But let me kind of get into a few of the questions I have for you today. And actually, I have many, so it's going to be a lot. So bear with me.
let's do it.
So in reading about your past and also reflecting on conversations you and I've had, you've spoken about your early exposure to art through your grandfather, right? And
Yeah.
I know that family really plays a big role in your art. It's in terms of the paintings and works that I've seen over the years. Um, can you talk a little bit about, those foundational moments that you can think back as far as you can and how those echoes from those foundational moments are sort of manifesting themselves in your studio?
Of course. And speaking to some of the attendants here, mom and dad. I think mom is actually watching right now. Um, but yes, so me and my brother, we started our formal years in San Diego, in Lemon Grove and Spring Valley specifically is where me and my brother grew up. And I spent the first 10 years of my life there. And there, because my grandparents lived there, so my dad is from, we understood the importance of hard work, ambition, education, spirituality. And within the scope of all these things, there was always this talk of uh, ministering or using a type of gift that is God given to serve and better, you know, yeah, serve God with these God given talents or these things that are almost feeling almost out of body. Um, and so I'm very fortunate that my brother Chase he's a filmmaker and director, very brilliant. And we come from a household of nurturing family members, mom and dad, Nana and Papa. Our nucleus was very nurturing and receptive and encouraging, even for us to explore uh, whatever it is that was our passion, our dream. They wanted us to have exploration, and whatever it is that we landed on, and if they tried their best to provide, an alley or a pathway for that exploration to happen, and art stuck for me. And I remember more specifically when I was in second grade. It was a show and tell um, day, and I had a friend with this boy named John Fowler. I remember he had came up to the front of the class and he showed this oil pastel drawing of an Arctic seal on like this felted paper that you can draw chalk pastels on, and I was really impressed by it, like at a young age. And I befriended that kid John, and we became really close friends. But I remember there was either a conversation with with his family, or it was either with John himself about where did he make that, and he led me into an after school art class. My grandfather would pick me up from Catholic school, and he would drop me off Wednesdays. Sit in the car in the parking lot for 2 hours, and that's where I was just able to play around.
That's great. That's great. It's so important when we see these sort of interests in young people, even if they're not your own children, but if you have any ability to sort of support or nurture those young creative interests, how they can really, really blossom and manifest themselves later in people's lives. And I have a lot of like similar thoughts myself when I was very young, 9, 10 years old. In many ways, obviously at 9 or 10 I didn't think about being a curator. I didn't know what a curator was and knew nothing about the art world. But in many ways, the same things I was sort of interested in that young age have sort of still manifested themselves into my professional life. Like interested in like I remember my early drawings, even though I've never considered myself an artist, but interested in setting these elaborate scenes and sort of figuring out who does what and where, sort of like acting like a director more than an artist in many ways. And I see echoes of that in my life now, and then I see echoes of it in my children, which is also quite interesting how you can sort of see these interests you have manifest themselves in other family members, particularly children. So it's great. It's great to hear that. So originally from the West Coast, now you're in Brooklyn. So in what ways of living in Brooklyn shifted or influenced your sense of, artistic urgency, or maybe changed the way you see the world as opposed to, California?
Right. People always ask me back when I moved to New York, how can you compare? And can't really compare um, justifiably between the two cities. They offer different things. Los Angeles, the way of I guess you can say transportation is how you see the city, is how you interact with the city, and it's not built for walking. There are a lot of people who are driving in cars, which adds to the traffic issue in Los Angeles. But that's really the scope of how we're able to interact with the landscape there. Zooming images from the side of either a passenger window or a driving window, and not many moments to really stop and see and intimately take in the landscape of things and spaces or smells or things around you. Whereas in New York, you're on the ground, you're smack dab in everything. A high sensory overload of things that are happening above you, below you. There's a subway station on the side and the periphery. There's so much to look at in New York City that for my LA brain, it was like eye candy, and so that definitely helped my aspect of looking, and you know the way in which the marks of the city, embellished by graffiti writers or subway stations that either have undergone some type of degradation or painting or other types of plastering of other posters, those the palimpsest of all that memory is there, that's encrusted in those fleeting moments, I think are very, very potent and speak to a type of density, speak to a type of haptic memory that exists in a city that you can actually be a part of. That I think is very interesting.
Yeah, I see that in your work, particularly the surfaces of your paintings. Being a native New Yorker myself, there's certain things about the city, certain cues about, as you mentioned, the sights, the sounds, the smells, all sorts of things about New York that are quite particular to the city. And as you travel more and more, and you've traveled quite a lot, you although every city is unique, and there's no point in trying to make apples to apples comparisons between them, but you do get to sort of feel, let's say, the vibe or the mood of different places, and that affects how you move. I like what you said about walking versus driving, because I feel strongly about that. I feel, having driven a lot when I was living in the US, and now I walk a lot where I live now, an awful lot, probably walk as much now as I did when I was living back in Brooklyn. But I drove, and I was living in the suburbs in New Jersey for, a few years. So I drove quite a lot. Um, when you see something beautiful in the distance, when you're in your car and you're in traffic, you really can't take it in. You really can't stop. You really can't. You really have a different relationship with your environment. Just to echo sort of what you said, and I think as an artist or as a creative person, in whatever field you're in, as a creative person, it's important to have those walking moments. Even if
Yeah,
you're not in a city that feels like a walking city, you have to figure out ways to have walking moments. You have to commune with your environment, even if it's not nature, right? Even if it's a bustling city, you have to commune with your environment. Yeah, yeah.
I
You
agree.
find inspiration that
I do,
way. Yeah,
because they're what's so interesting is that you don't need to be in an art gallery or white walled space or museum or the Met, even though I love these places. You don't have to be in these specific places in order to experience art or anything that's beautiful. It's really in the moments of beholding. if beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and if it takes stopping and looking at things a little bit slowly and deriving a, or even trying to figure out where is this source of finding this thing pleasing, where's that coming from? It has no words, but it sustains a feeling, and that right there is something very powerful, right? You don't have to have any type of figurative uh you know contour, any of those types of things in order to anchor someone to liking something off just by looking at it. And so for me, I can be enamored by walking to the train by just looking at certain arrangements of trash, or the way in which some wall, or the way in which someone's iron rot gate has corroded or taken different colors and shapes over time. I get really interested in that. And walking is it's very meditative. Obviously, as you're walking, you're breathing a lot, so you can oxygen into your brain. So therefore, more thoughts and ideas that can come out more naturally when you are walking. So a lot of things do happen. Like, not only is it physical exercise, but it's a way to show hospitality, I guess you can say, or hospitality, or to a space that you're in. Because I'm also a transplant, and yes, I'm a black skinned person who is not from New York. So yes, I'm a transplant in some cases, and so there's this type of being aware of the environment and paying homage to the environment, and being inspired no matter where you're at in the world, on the globe, that you can find inspiration in small things.
Yeah, yeah. The light is different no matter where you are. Um, talk about your time at Black Rock Residency, and the reason I think that's important to talk about is like one, is when you were there that you and I really started having regular communication, and two, the Harvey B. Gantt Center recently had an exhibition that I curated that was highlighting artists from the first and second year of that residency, and you were one of the artists in the exhibition. Um,
Yes.
talk about being in Senegal and what was that like for you as an artist?
Being in Senegal was my first entry point ever into Africa, the motherland. Um, but it came about, I remember, when I was in my last couple of months of my MFA, that there was this new residency that was like, opening up, allowing people to come experience Kende Wiley's, um, uh, they can say, a residency that he's been working on for, at that time, for the past like 10 years, and being a part of the world that normally people don't visit. And so there's a double-edged sword, that you can come to a place that people don't visit, and it's in Africa. You're by the water. It's very beautiful, but also you know, you can tap into the nature. You can tap into your soul. You can tap into your roots. If you are someone of African or African American heritage, it has that type of element to uncovering something that a lot of African Americans are yearning and wish for. And I'm so fortunate that my talent, or my art, even allowed me to get there. But the funny thing about it all is, my residency month was between March and April of 2020. So, as we all know, as referential to March 2020, where we were during that time, and I was in the air, masked up, and I had Clorox bleach wipes then, and touched down in Senegal after 22 hours of flying, and it was amazing. I remember meeting some of the cohort, and Kinde and some of the artists were there, and they were saying, "Have you touched grass yet? Have you touched the Sahel here?" And at that time I didn't. So there's a video of me that I captured taking my sandals off after a 22-hour flight, and walking and touching the grass there. Very, very beautiful. And then 2 days later, I had my 28th birthday. So a lot of beautiful and a lot of life changing things were happening on the positive side, and also on a more precarious side, with the world kind of going up in flames with this new virus. So 2 months became 4 months. I've actually been um, held pretty safe within the confines of the residency. There were, of course, curfews, and we couldn't be out, we couldn't engage with the landscape there. So our knit was what's inside the residency. Um, but it was so transformational. but oddly showered in or shadowed in a bit by this weird virus that no one could name. It was a very weird time, but
Yeah,
I enjoyed it.
yeah, and it's an interesting point because I've talked to people who've had different experiences in those months, right? Like a lot's been written about it. Obviously a lot's been said, but there are people who had some beautiful experiences during that very difficult time.
Yeah,
And it's
yeah,
sometimes I think people are hesitant to talk about the beautiful experiences they were having. Maybe there's a sense of guilt, because of, again, it was incredibly difficult for a lot of people. A lot of people lost loved ones. A lot of I could go on and on.
yeah.
Yet in the midst of that, because of the required seclusion and sheltering, it created situations that would have otherwise not existed for people. And your extended stay in Senegal would not have happened were it not for that situation. And so you gain such a wealth of like experiences and knowledge that will stay with you for the rest of your life as a result of this unexpected thing that unfolded and affected the world. I remember reading in an interview not so long ago. It was an interview Diallo at Gagosian had conducted
Yeah.
with you, and you were talking about seeing what was happening with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and all of these things unfolding from a distance, and how that affected you. And then when you got back to the city, to kind of see things boarded up and to see graffiti and to see these kinds of things. Can you talk a little bit about that experience?
Of course, yeah. I came back from Senegal in July, and I remember being in Senegal watching in CNN with some of the folks there what was going on, and it was a complete out of body experience. Everybody was confused, and so when I came back, I didn't know what I was really getting into until I was just in my neighborhood. The same route, the same walk to certain places that I would normally go on, and they looked different, they felt different. We couldn't go inside coffee shops, couldn't go inside stores. Things were boarded up. There was this no entry type of energy, and so naturally, your sight and your vision goes onto the outskirts of things. It happens to focus on the periphery of things. If we're focused, if we're suspected to be on the fringes of our city, uh, and then I'm confronted also with this Nina Simone quote that everyone loves, that if you are an artist, you have to confront the times and what are you doing to communicate to these times. And I would say we have never experienced anything like that ever, at least. And so for me to kind of think and articulate a type of reality, there was this ambiguous nature to it that meant that reality was always in flux to begin with, that there was no real, straight line to things. And so I like to think about memory and subconscious kind of adding into this way of thinking about that. And as you see the graffiti, you see the border, you see the energy of the angst that was there in the city. Like you see what's there, but you also feel what was where it came from. And so I think also during that time, the work started to actually absorb grief and anxiety, and out of losing people that are very close, like my grandfather, to COVID in 2021 was very hard because I was experiencing these high moments in my career, things that my grandfather would be so happy and my parents would be so happy to know about. But the weirdness about it all was that experiencing these momentous highs in careers and then these really weird lows in life where metaphysically the person who's nurtured you is now passing on because of this thing. And so when you're painting something and you want to be real, you want to be reactionary, you want to put yourself on the canvas, the abstraction started to come out as a means to make sense of this anxiety and this grief. And finding ways to use the paint to communicate to these emotions, really, whether it be gestural motions of my body using oil stick or spray cans to get like a swoosh of color or a spray of color, quality of a line, whether it be different ways to make marks, whether it be throwing paint, spilling paint, letting paint drip. How do you paint something that looks and feels like the emotion that you had when you're painting? If you're crying, how do you make the painting cry? If the
Yeah,
painting's
yeah.
anxious, how do you make that? How is that evoked? And so that's how a lot of my works were starting to work out through that space of orchestrating the emotions and even maybe the pace of the paint to do different things. And that became experimental, and it became where I now am landing on with a little bit more of a maturity, not so much of anxiousness and grief.
Sure, sure. And I think that that idea of using grief, using every emotion, I have a very interesting, at least for me, like interesting exercise that I do around emotions and sort of thinking through the fact that we tend to like run away from the things that we think will make us feel bad or might harm us emotionally. But my exercise is to use every emotion, to kind of accept the reality that you're going to feel grief, so use it. You're going to feel anger sometimes, so use it. You're going to feel love, so use it. Don't run away from the realities of what you are feeling, because those things can fuel you in different ways as long as you remain clear that you have to sort of like stay in control of these emotions. But when I encounter your work, when I look at your paintings, especially works that have been made in the past, I would say 3 or 4 years, I see a range of emotions manifesting themselves in your work, and I can see the grief,
Mhm.
and I can find myself in your paintings. I can locate different feelings and times and moments in my life in your work, which sort of like made this strong connection that I feel. Let's switch gears a bit and talk about some of your other inspirations in Los Angeles, particularly the Underground Museum. So I know you that place. Was like a special part of your life. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that. And for those who don't know, an Underground Museum founded by Noah Davis. But just talk a little bit about that. I'd love to hear it.
Yes. So I graduated my undergrad in 2015, and I remember there was, I think it was some type of LA Times article, unfortunately disclosing the death and untimely death of Noah Davis, um, due to cancers. Uh, but I was reading this article about this artist couple, Karan Davis and Noah Davis, having this studio space in Crenshaw, where part of Noah's dream was, after he passed away, that this would be a communal space and there was going to be museum shows and it was going to be curated like any old establishment that museum type curated shows would happen in. This was a place in Crenshaw. This was a place in Los Angeles, um, where a lot of Black folks of different various creative degrees of feeling the same way about wanting to be around other Black folks and brown folks that felt that same way. It was a hub, and for me, coming from the Valley, I was coming from the San Fernando Valley, so there was always an inherent like push to be involved in any type of action anyway. So either going to Hollywood or going downtown or even going to Crenshaw was an effort. But when you got there, you met a lot of amazing people. I ran into a young Geneva Ellis there. I ran into Lauren Halsey, Daryl Kay, Justin Leroy, um, AWOL Risku. It did a lot of people. And at the time, there was this exhibition that had Theaster Gates, Henry Taylor, David Hammonds, I think maybe Robert, I forgot who else was in it, but it was just amazing, right? And it was influential for me. And I needed that space because I was the only painter that I knew in my friends. And it felt like it was like a lonely thing. And so, you find your people. And And luckily, that was a space where people could find their people.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And I know we have some images of your work that we'll queue up in a minute or two. I want to just ask you one or two more questions before we do that. And so I know we're bouncing from coast to coast in this conversation, so please just bear with me. So thinking about Pratt, right? Can you describe a moment during your time at Pratt that may have like fundamentally changed your way of thinking about painting and also ceramics?
Yes. So one thing about me is even in undergrad, even in following into MFA, I've always supplemented painting with ceramics. Like I've always, but my entry point was always through hand building. I couldn't go through. And so while I was at when I was in my MFA, I took, of course, painting in some ceramic classes, as I would normally do. And it's funny, like the painting class and all those things. Like I learned a lot. I was challenged a lot. Like I had a lot of Humpty Dumpty moments that I'm grateful for. But there was this one summer school class that I took. It was called Walkscapes.
Hmm.
That was actually really important to naming actually the thing that I felt, and it had a theory to it. And uh, it was taught by Professor Hal Griffey, and I forgot his first name. But essentially, what we did is that we would read, um, we would talk about the groups of artists, the Dadaists and Surrealists in the 1921 Banal Paris, and they would go on these series of walks around the city, and they would make these descriptive notes, or they'll have these descriptive ruminations on their observations in these durational pieces that they would embody or go on. And so we actually had done that in a class where we had walked from Pratt and we walked down to Home Depot. And within that time, it was for us to be open to be observing into how did the landscape change. And you notice that if you were just to be aware that within a 3 block span, you can see so many different cultural groups merge and flow and coexist. And like housing and projects are merging in with Hasidic Jew neighborhoods, and you have students who are all different types of people coming from different types of backgrounds. You're seeing this mixing pot happening. And so within that class, I started to understand that walking as an aesthetic practice or walking as a practice is something that I needed to have that named this interest of this kinetic memory or this kinetic thing that was happening in the city. And so that class actually helped me, figure out what kind of readings that also supplement this type of thinking. Um, and that also brings me to like this book that I was reading by Francisco Carrari. He's an architect, and he talks about walking and walking as an aesthetic practice, and it gets very interesting, where he makes these attentions or these connections to um, the biblical story, like Cain and Abel,
Hmm. Hmm.
and how Abel embodies this person of wonder, play, and creativity, where Cain is sedentary. He's the farmer. He's stayed put, stable, and so there's this want to be like an Abel, to be creative, to wander, to play, to look around and look at the world like that. And you got to keep that. You have to keep that around, as a core part of yourself. You don't want to, get calcified. And so, walking and being a part of the environment is something that helps me always have an anchor. Uh, as far as ceramics, there is this anchorage to also to in the biblical sense of the creation story, if you believe in it, that we're derived and made from dust, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, that type of thing. And clay to me is very resemblant to, no, nor are humans God, nor should we play God, but this idea of molding something out of clay feels very, you know, interesting, symbolic. And what's also even more symbolic is that like frogs, cocoons, butterflies, clay undergo this type of metamorphosis. They change
Sure,
state. And
sure.
I love that type of alchemical, relationship to clay, how it changes states, how mentally we have different states that we flux and flow with inside of. And so I'm always trying to find these connections between my interests and also synthesizing philosophy that provides a scaffolding for all my interests.
Mm. We're gonna get one of your images on screen, but and I'll ask you my last Pratt question. So you interacted with some really fantastic people there, some artists that I know and admire as well, including Taquasi Dyson and Cullen Washington Jr. Two fantastic artists. Um, I think you mentioned Black compositional thought
Right.
as a framework that Takwasi introduced to you. How does that concept show up in your work now?
Well, I take Black compositional thought as something that Turquoise Dyson minds as a part of her ongoing practice. And I don't necessarily quote those types of things that she's discovered, but what it did invoke, similar to how Cullen talked about his work and his love for abstraction and space and just so poetically said and so sure and so confident that I wanted to be that. I wanted to create a like I said before, a scaffolding of where my philosophy can hang off of, that I could create a world that it serves as my structure, my
Mm,
philosophy. And so Black compositional thought is beautiful, in which, Turquoise describes it in, I'm going to paraphrase and stunt this down a bit, but it's astonishing as to how many ways in which Black people over the years and over centuries have tried to strive for liberation and freedom through maneuvering shapes of their body and trying to find liberation and such, like referencing Henry Box Brown and things of that nature. Her shapes are abstractly tied to inspirational Black figures of the past, but it's not just so much the snapshot and like painted photo of like I'm Henry Box Brown. It's the feeling, it's the encompassing, it's the depth, it's the breadth of it all. And I think that honors that honors a thing. And I think what's beautiful about Turquoise Dyson's work and Cullen Washington's work is that there's a type of honor that I
mm.
really appreciate.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So there's some magicians in the background here that are going to get your first painting up, and so what I like to do during this part of our conversation is, you can share what you like about the work, and then I'll follow up with a couple of questions, and then we'll advance to the next image.
Yes, I realize I didn't provide you any titles to these
It's
pieces.
fine.
So the work that you're seeing here, if you all are seeing here, is a curious shade fell upon thy brother's countenance. This was the first painting that I made this year, 2025. And me mentioning back a few moments ago this biblical story of Cain and Abel, this brotherly encounter maybe gone awry. I like to think of even the way that this title is structured as this poetic prose to it. It does allude to scripture. It does allude to a type of interaction. But I think what's very beautiful about this one, or the way in which this painting has fallen together, is that there's a confidence that I feel that I tapped into in this painting, that it came from just the years and years of getting to a stylistic approach of handling paint, that I feel this surmises or feels like the investigation of all the years coming to a concise point.
And cars make appearances in your paintings quite often.
Yes.
I'm curious about that. Like, is that sort of because it was such a big part of your life being in Los Angeles? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So cars are. I read Carl Jung, and I read a lot of or I think about things that are in psychoanalytic therapy or psychology, where there are totems and there's symbols and there's certain things that people attach identity to or serve as an entry point to certain maybe suppressed or repressed memories. Similar to like in the movie Inception, that you have to have something from the real world to kind of tether you down when you go to the deeper and deeper layers of your subconscious, right? That you have to have something that's real from the real world to bring you back. And so for me, I think about I embody these two different thoughts, or yeah, two different thoughts. The and I saw here daylight writer. I'm naming this question you said about why go to Africa, and you mentioned Sankofa. Yes, that's a very important point. Sankofa, the idea of going back and using something in the past and fetching it to go make it be more useful in the future for future generations is something that I also think about. And so the cars being a symbol is an anchor for me as a type of idea to drive the idea of legacy, right? So cars go in motion, they go forward and they go back. And we want to think about using the past or information from the past to be utilized to drive the future forward. So cars enably, essentially are a symbol for this type of legacy, because legacy happens to deal with different years and eras and patches of time. So then that can also be invoked in the type of models of the cars that are being introduced into certain paintings. That can be a time stamp or a referential, placer that can be used. But essentially, yes, cars also, used as a symbol, also a divisive way to kind of give like really interesting shapes to kind of break up a composition.
Yeah, yeah. Let's advance to the next image. I remember in the interview that I referenced, the interview with Diallo, you mentioned your grandfather dropping you off at art classes, but you mentioned him dropping you off at art classes in a Pontiac.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So he had this 1978 black Pontiac Bonneville, and like he would just roll up into to school, elementary school. He'll pick me and my brother up, and you'll have either like Carl's Jr. or some like food that Nana would have made for us, and we would sit in the parking lot and we would eat that, and we'd talk a little bit, and then we would drive, either to wherever we were going. It was just that was the Batmobile. That's just where we were.
Yeah.
And so I remember, pulling up into my Nana's house, my Nana and Papa's house in San Diego. There's this pink stucco house that they had, and they had this, show, I guess, garage that you could park underneath. And every spring, as long as my grandparents lived there, there was this family of mourning doves that would nest, and every year would be a new season of mourning doves being born. And sometimes you would see the eggs splat from the rafters. Babies didn't make it. And so in the painting cluster here, you see in 2024, this is a painting that was featured in my Ritual Welcome exhibition with Nicodeme in September. And this is my first time kind of playing around with this idea of the symbol, the dove, and the car together, and these people interacting in this space. So the doves, the pigeons, act as that anchor and that thing of being a real. It's a real anchor for me, but doesn't stop the painting, from that personal entry point. It opens it up a lot more. And so, if you think about Italian Renaissance, why do people use symbols? Why do artists use bubbles? Why do artists use shells, dogs, flowers, doves? They all had symbolic meaning. And you can think that doves and pigeons, for the matter of New York's sake, it's almost like soul transference, spirit leaving or in flight, or perhaps freedom, perhaps peace, perhaps a lot of things that you would attribute to the nomenclature of what a dove might feel for you. You can associate your feelings to that. And then, of course, the cars, the different interesting models and shapes of the cars just added to different quality of like diagonal lines, curves, but also played as a real way to kind of anchor me and have fun.
Sure, sure. Wonderful. You mentioned Italian Renaissance. Is my memory serving me correct? Didn't you spend some time in Italy?
I did. I spent a month in Siena, Italy, right during the time of the Paolo, It's like they're like the horse race that they've done for like since the 13th or 14th
Yeah.
century. And
Yeah.
that's the birthplace of like Italian Renaissance right there, more or less. So by walking the streets of, again, the walkscapes comes into play. And like I said, being inspired anywhere you're at on the globe, that you can still come out with inspiration. So now walking around Siena, that inspiration of like, okay, maybe these artists walk this very cobblestone that I'm walking on. That's inspirational. And then you go to the Duomo
Truly.
and you see something that you're just in awe of, like, wow, like people made this in the reflection of trying to get closer to the perfectionism of God. And you're just enamored by humans' efforts.
Yeah.
And that's inspirational. And so for me, traveling is how you make sense of the world, is how you also work out your identity, where you're placed in the world, how you see things. Very important.
Mm. Yeah. Let's advance to the next image.
Yes.
So this work is obviously much more abstract than what we've seen. Please share a few thoughts and I'll follow up.
Yes. So this painting is called Walkscapes number 3. Um, excuse me. This was painted in 2021. So 2021 is this time and space that I was talking about, where there's a lot of grief, a lot of anxiety coming into play, and painting paintings while you're, excuse me, painting paintings while you're crying, while you're grieving. And this one was really emotional, but I love the way that there's a type of problem solving that happens
Yeah.
when you're trying to work out an abstract painting. There are certain things and qualities and like rules you have to consider that don't apply in figurative works, such as how do you solve a square or rectangle? And you have these formal questions such as, does the weight feel good? Does the directionality feel good? Does it have, does it serve as a really nice thing to look at? And a lot of these paintings were very raw and these scared me, but I think they were necessary, definitely.
When you say they scared you, what do you mean by that?
Um, Scared me in the way in which I I took I took a chance after I came back from Senegal. I was known at the time for doing some figurative work, and I came back and I started making the shift to making abstract paintings, and my gallerists and people around were like, "Where's this coming from?" And I wanted to speak more real to like what I was feeling. Really, I wouldn't really wanted to be like, I wanted to get it all out. And so I stayed quiet for about 4 months, 6 months, and I just made things. And and that's where this comes from. It's thinking about this passage of time, passage of
Sure.
corrosion. Maybe it's a plug from a wall that I might have walked by, or perhaps maybe this is the swirl of cognition. Maybe this is how memories get pulled from the gunk and become rendered thoughts. But similarly, as there is something that happens on the outside, there's something that happens on the inside. And one of the things I was really trying to question in the idea of a lot of young Black artists being grouped into this homogenous pool of identity painters, what way can you speak to one's existence through how somebody perceives a thing and observes a thing, which again goes into like a type of Immanuel Kantian type of aesthetic judgments of beauty. I could look at a crack in a wall, and the way that that crack might have fissured through that wall, I could say that looks pretty good. It has nothing to do with my skin color, my race, or anything. It happens to do with just a very, very simple. I see it, I like it, I felt something, and I wanted to get there with just oil paint.
Yeah. Let's advance to the next image in the interest of time. So it's something that you know sort of make me think about. It makes me think of artists like Sir Frank Bowling. It makes me think about, Jack Whitten in that way. Two artists that I hold in the highest esteem. Um, there are things about their work that I can articulate, and then there are things about their work that it's impossible for me to articulate. I can
Yes.
only feel it. I can only feel it, and if you feel it, you feel it too. And if you don't feel it, I can't express it.
Yeah, it's a level of undeniability, and that's the thing. Like you can walk into something and just be like, I like it. It's undeniable.
Yeah.
And yeah, so Jack Whitten was God rest his soul. Like he spoke so beautifully and spiritually about his practice and like what he was influenced by. Um, and yeah, and no, I think what was so interesting about this painting took me about like 4 months to make, and I started making it around the time when I came back from Senegal. And I started on its horizontal, and it's essentially it's the piece is called Choir. But I was thinking about actually a Peter Paul Rubens painting, Four Heads of a Moor, um, when I was actually thinking about this painting, and I made it into a four-head choir of these women, belting out relations or singing out into the space. So my nana and a lot of my family in early life happened to deal with the church. My dad played the piano and organ for the church, Baptist church in San Diego. My nana was in a choir. My grandfather was the board of deacons. So like, that was just us. And so again, during the time of the pandemic, when I came back, how do you speak to the shifting time? So I spent the whole time painting on its horizontal, and my final presentation was to display it on its vertical, to shift it in that
Mm.
conceptual way. And it did something really interesting that I'd never seen before. And yeah, it shocked my galleries, and it shocked a lot of people. And but I'm glad that this painting actually made it into the LACMA. It has a special note that I've written on the back of it. That's I spoke to my grandparents a little bit, just like give them a little thanks. That's on the back of
Yeah.
that painting. Um,
Yeah.
but a lot of this was just it was therapy. It was therapy. It was like I feel
Yeah.
this, I feel that, I feel this, I feel that. Let me mix this color with that. Let me put this turpentine in this bowl and do this, and just watch the paint just drip, run, and observe and observe, observe and observe. And essentially, what you're looking at is just an amalgamation of one's thought process of solving
Mm.
something.
Yeah. Let's advance to the next image. And so this work, um, I've seen in person, love it, and and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this work is inspired by your time in Senegal.
Yes, yeah. So this one is the rock that took. Sorry, this one's called "The Rocks Took a Hold of My Soul." And yeah, so this was the first painting that I had made while I was in Senegal. And when you do get a chance, or if you do get a chance to see this painting in person, you will notice that at the top quadrant of the painting, there's two canvases that are stitched together. So it's actually kind of like a Frankenstein canvas. And this was made out of this is pretty much made because when I was going to Senegal to go to the fabric store, we had to go to the fabric store to find our linen. And I had a lot of hard time and trial and error to find a linen that would actually stretch. So it took me a long time to find something that would work. This painting right here, it it was the only painting that I was able really to focus on because so much was going on in the world. Um, and it felt like this was this is the offering that I could give myself in commemorance from being in Senegal, just by for one being enamored by being in Africa, and also to just being really confused as to where I was. But you can see in the early painting, this painting here in 2020, some of the decision makings or the ways that I'm thinking about trying to complete this image are have crossed over and through to other paintings. Like you can see in the bottom right, or I guess the bottom left hand corner, there's this graffiti little
Mhm.
nook there. There's this want to kind of have something kind of like fall over and overgrown. some type of like image where I feel the way in which Carl Jung talks about memory is that, you know, a lot of it is altered, as we call it, to our forefront. And so I always liked the idea of images falling apart, you know, becoming and undoing was an interesting place for me to be, you know, be in. So I love the idea of figuration, as well as I love the idea of abstraction, and allowing moments and space for both things to play around is where I like to sit in.
Yeah, it's exciting to see your work sort of volley between abstraction and figuration, and also find this sort of nexus where those two things kind of combine. Look at the next image as well, where those two things kind of combine.
Hmm.
And also, as you mentioned, problem solving and decision making, which I think for people who are not artists, who don't spend a lot of time around paintings, um, paintings are so much about problem solving and decision making. So can you share a bit about this work?
Yes, this one is called Something Tender. Um, when I was working out something, again, like I talked about with the Carl Jung thing and totems and symbols, I was working out something in the first iteration of that, where you can see in this bathroom scene, there are two women, you know, embracing each other, some type of tender moment, touching each other's head or hair. But you notice behind the woman that has the white or the yellow shirt that there is this figure that's sitting in the distance. That figure is actually a sculpture that I had lived with. It's one of those old 1950s, 1960s derogatory like fishing gnomes, and I ended up putting like a bouquet of flowers in it, and you know, repurposed that energy. But that was a way for me to think about an adolescent self. So this totem that you see in the back is almost like a ghost of Christmas past. So it's like a me. It's a me visiting a memory, right?
Mm,
And so this red room, this bathroom, you know, Nana had a bathroom that has this weird specific switch that would turn the bathroom light red, like the room would turn red, like red light therapy or some shit like that. And it was just like interesting like thing that would cross my mind. And so what I would do is through the social process of like images and referencing and triggering other things, I would go into Photoshop and I would take a
mm.
space. The space triggered a response, and I'll take a collage of certain things of either images I'm taking from my walks, from day to day in the studio or outside, and I'll collage a fragmented memory or, you know, something that feels similar. And so this painting kind of does that to me. It's like an auntie family vibe in a space that feels familiar, and there's this
Yeah.
totem, this viewer in the background, you know, viewing this thing.
That's- So we have two more works, and I want to get to them. Make sure that we get to see them before we conclude today. It's been such a great conversation. We're down to the final few minutes, so this one we'll talk about briefly.
Yes. Yeah. So this one again, a lot of it has to deal with family and referential to stories. And so my dad grew up playing the piano, and I also grew up listening to my dad playing the piano. And so this is a moment of, you can say like a patriarchal moment of, again, this totem back turned, sitting on the piano stool. That is a referential moment to myself, having moments of remembering sitting next to my dad while he's practicing playing the piano. You know, the sepia golden green tone is almost like this Kodak film moment or this
Mm.
stain of time that
Yeah,
feels nostalgic.
yeah, wonderful. I love that, love that work. It's so awesome, man.
Thank you.
Um, yeah, I haven't seen that in person. In fact, maybe my first time like seeing this image as well. Yeah, that's strong, man. Very
That
strong.
was a turning
Let's
point work. I learned about that one.
What'd you say?
That was a turning point work for me. I learned a lot because I showed that in 2022. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, I can see that. I can see that. So let's go to the final image.
yeah,
So
yes. So
darker.
this one,
Yeah,
sorry.
no, I was saying
Uh,
so darker, more in the abstract realm.
yes, and this also comes in the same sweet and season of works as the Walkscapes 3. You know, this is where the space of anxiety and grief came out, and also came out a lot of exploration from that time. And I was frustrated. I was frustrated on this painting. This painting was actually figurative. It started off that way for months. And again, as you're trying to finish a painting and problem solve it, if it's not working, you figure out how to change it around, turn it around. Um, so I ended up just like playing around with this idea of overgrowing this image that was once there with now like this type of graffiti palimpsest, almost like a wall that's been forgotten that you just walk past before you go to the L train or something like that. And so out of just playing around, I've ended up building layers and layers and layers and layers, which create more depth, create more play, and more of viewing pleasure for hopefully the audience. But it's my way of thinking about the subconscious and the swirl of memory.
So thank you so much for that, Devin. I have one final question. um, so so what are the new questions that you're asking yourself in the studio? What are you grappling with? What are you thinking about?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? So like some of the continuation of the themes from Ritual of Welcome are still persisting with the cars and doves as symbolic things, but now it's just branching out of that thematic thing and it's becoming more referential into other things and other moments I'm trying to interject into life. And I definitely want to speak to life as it's happening. So a lot of where my work is going right now, I'm preparing for a show in October in 2025. So I'm very excited about that. And so a lot of the work that I'm working on right now is still exploring these themes, but now it's just doubling down on like things that I've learned, where there's going to be exploration in ceramics and abstraction is of course figuration. But I'm thinking about my past sound, I'm thinking about traveling, I'm thinking about um, emotions, I'm thinking about life and souls coming into the new world. I guess I could drop the mic with this one. I'm expecting to be a new father in August. So I'm trying to figure out where that falls and intersects into this waking life that I have the opportunity to be an artist in. So I want to be able to be open and see where it goes with that feeling.
Yeah, yeah. August is a good month. That's my birthday month. So,
Here we go.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
listen, man. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate everything that you've shared. I learned a lot of things about your work that I didn't know as well, and so I'm sure everyone that joined us had a fantastic time. So, just respecting your time, respecting everyone else's. This concludes our conversation. Just thank you again. I really appreciate it, Devin. You've been great. So, final words from me: the Gantt Center's goal is always to provide programs that inform and inspire. The support of viewers like you allows the Gantt Center to reach its audience and to develop programs like today's open air. You can lend your support to the Gantt Center by texting give to Gantt to the number 91999. Also, be sure to like and subscribe to the Gantt's YouTube channel for future updates and programs that we're doing. I want to thank you for joining us for this open air conversation. I really enjoyed it. And we look forward to you joining us next month for our next open air with artist Deborah Roberts. Wishing everyone a wonderful evening.